dangerous, correct? Whether they were difficult or easy. You also talked about emotion. Do you know of any other kind of contexts or situations where one would be more likely to use logic over emotion or
Oh, great, yeah. So actually, I'm glad you asked this because I meant to say something about the brain structure that came up briefly in the slide, the DLPFC, so dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So one of the things that Josh Green claims is we must be using more reasoning in these switching cases as opposed to pushing cases because we see more DLPFC activity. That's the structure and the size of the brain that's associated with storage of information for brief time periods, for executive control, for reasoned reflection. But think about this. In these cases, there are two things that reasoning might be crucially important for. First of all, it's a dilemma. And you may have a kind of parity between the emotions that say help and the emotions that say don't harm. And you really need to sort of reflect on those two emotions and engage in some sort of emotional deliberation. And there are studies of just emotional self-awareness that show that the DLPFC comes online when people reflect on their emotional states. So rather than showing it's not emotion, you're showing that when you have cases of emotional conflict, emotion regulation through reasoning may be important. But even more obviously, these are cases where you're counting heads. So 5 people versus 1 person, that's a math problem. Now when you imagine a horrible situation of pushing somebody off of a bridge, you just don't even go into the math. The numbers don't even matter at that stage. But once you're presented with a case where the emotions are sort of close, keeping track of the head count becomes important. Well, the DLPFC is a major area involved in that kind of symbolic and mathematical cognition. So I think one way you can expect to see more reason coming online is to say, when there's a moral decision that's not decided simply by basic values like don't kill or help people in need, but requires further reflection on how to apply those values, how many people will get killed, how serious is the need, how likely is it that I can intervene successfully, and so on, then reasoning will start to play a very big role. And I think a lot of the moral decisions we make in life are of that kind. We don't have to renegotiate our basic values. We have those. So when you're making a moral decision, it's usually how do I apply these values that I've had since childhood to this novel situation that I may never anticipated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you just started to answer the question I was going to ask. I was just wondering about crimes of passion and what your term would be about cases where people lash out when they're in extreme emotional states. And from my own experience, when I'm considering very mad at someone, and also from just observing the behavior of people acting in anger in ways that have very terrible consequences, it seems like they're not thinking, and that it would be helpful to think. So I was wondering, and it also seems like you can't avoid that some kind of deliberation. You can, of course, once you start thinking about the consequences, then you can feel the emotional pull, but you can't skip that step. But it seems like you just made acknowledge that sort of thing goes on in your. You made room for reason in your view. So I'm wondering exactly where you differ on with Josh Green and the whole process. And I know you're painting with a broad brush here, but yeah.
Great, yeah, and actually this does tie into something in the last question, which is going back to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So why do we need this brain structure if moral judgments are just based on emotion? One further reason for needing this brain structure is we need to figure out what to do once we've made the judgment that something is wrong. So if somebody has done something that you consider impermissible or outrageous, maybe somebody has mistreated you, a friend or a lover has treated you badly, now you need to decide what to do about it. That's a reasoning problem. The judgment that it's wrong is one thing, and the emotions that associate with that give you a strong motivation to act, maybe to aggress against that person. But you might realize that aggressing against that person has long, extreme consequences that are very bad for you, bad for them, something you wouldn't ultimately reflectively endorse. It turns out that the DLPFC is essentially involved in punishment. So there's a nice study that's been recently done by a group in Zurich, where they use transcranial magnetic stimulation to basically inactivate the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and then they give people moral vignettes. And they ask people about them, and people were absolutely normal, unaffected with respect to the judgment, is this wrong? Their wrongness judgments look just like the control group. but when asked, should you punish this person, they said no. So you get people saying, this person has committed a terrible moral wrong. Should I punish them? No. So it's that second stage where you figure out what to do with your judgment that requires a lot of reasoning. In a crime of passion, the ability to step back and say, yes, I know this was terrible, but lashing out against the person is not the right thing to do. Vigilante justice is not the right thing to do. That takes emotion regulation and reasoning. So, does that answer?
Sort of. So
Okay.
where exactly do you differ with, why aren't you a dual process
Oh,
guy
well,
if you allow...
Here's one thing. The whole notion of dual process is a reification of this Jekyll-Hyde brain. We have many processes, hundreds of processes, and different tasks involve different processes, and for any given task there's going to be a fair amount of complexity. The idea that emotions are subcortical, irrational, automatic, unconscious, and that reasoning is conscious, reflective, slow, rational, that dichotomy is, I think, totally mistaken. So just consider the claim that emotions are automatic and that reasoning is reflective. Well, think about just very automatic reasoning, like the kinds of stuff we do with very overlearned problems. Or think about the emotions that require a fair amount of reflection in order to well up inside of us. I think a better story is the one that says reason and emotion are almost always working in concert to arrive at decision making in a very wide variety of domains. So rather than thinking about these two kinds of brains that we switch between, like we've taken the Jekyll-Hyde potion, we should think about the emotional and non-emotional structures as typically both involved in any complex decision we need to make. And those categories too, especially the category of reasoning, is not monolithic. There are going to be lots and lots of different processes involved in reasoning. So again, that two process as opposed to many process thinking is, I think, bad science.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, I have 2 pointed questions. The first one asks, okay, so I was wondering what you mean by reason when you say, so I was thinking reason within metaphysics and then reason within epistemology. You said, well, we've been thinking for a long time about why killing is wrong. And there it seemed like you were wondering more about metaphysics, what makes an action wrong. But then epistemologically, I might just know, maybe non-inferentially, that killing, a particular instance of killing is wrong. Maybe, so for an audience, like, if I see somebody happy, I can know that they're happy just by looking at them. But what makes them happy? Why are they happy? Well, that's a different question, right? That's the metaphysics. So the first question is, what did you mean by reason? Were you meaning it from more a metaphysics question or an epistemology question?
Really the epistemology question, but the crucial thing to note there is that if the epistemology of morality is immediate, if it's like we don't have to reflect but immediately see the badness in things, that indicates, it doesn't prove, but it's indicating that we're resolving these questions about morality by our gut, by introspecting and seeing how these things make us feel. We don't have ready access to anything that looks like reasons for that decision. And it's precisely because of that, I think, that we need to be very cautious about too close an analogy between the perception case and the moral case. Because in the perception case, it's true that I can see that my cup is full just by looking at it. In the moral case, it feels like it's equally immediate, but the emotions that got there through a socialization process. So the capacity, I think the authority of those emotional states has a very different epistemological standing than the authority of, say, our sensory states. So forgive philosophers, non-philosophers in the room, forgive this philosophical discussion. But I guess the simple way of saying that is what we get with emotions is the sense that this is obviously true, but the emotions themselves might be conditioned. So we shouldn't infer from obvious to a universal fact.
Yeah, one quick follow-up is, because I was thinking in a lot of your cases, so I like a view like Michael Huemer's, where he argues that for a lot of these non-inferentially justified beliefs, the justification or the reason is that they seem true. So it seems that somebody's happy, that justifies me in believing that they are happy. It seems that acting in those pedophilic ways is wrong, that justifies me in believing it's wrong. Now, the emotions are there, but I think he would say in a lot of those cases the emotions are more like a decoration, like they're there, but the actual, if the belief's justified, the belief might be justified on the basis of the fact that it seems wrong. So I was wondering what you thought about that view, and then
so briefly, I mean, I think that just as an empirical claim, what we call seeming in the moral domain just is emotion. When something seems wrong, it works out that that just is an emotional state. And I think he's right that these cases where something seems wrong, in that sense it really is wrong for me, because it's like food taste. If I say, this food seems delicious, unless I've been given a happy pill, that probably means the food is delicious, meaning it's the kind of food that makes me feel gustatory pleasure. But what we do when we universalize moral wrongness and say, this seems wrong to me, therefore it's wrong for everyone, that's no longer a simple inference from seeming. That's based on a background theory about everybody sharing morality. And there, I think, we're making a crucial mistake.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. Really like to talk.
Thank you.
Assuming that moral judgment or emotions are necessary for moral judgment, what do you think the relationship between moral judgment and moral agency is? So it seems like there may be a person lacking moral judgment, but we still might hold them responsible if they have capacities of like self-control and these other capacities.
Oh, wow, that's a huge question. I mean, it ties into a lot of the issues that came up yesterday in the legal context. I don't have a strong view about it, but I don't have it's not an area I work on, but I'll say this. I do think that once we discover facts about the nature of human choice, and also facts about the nature of morality, traditional views about responsibility need to be revised. And a certain kind of view that gives, that allocates responsibility as a function of free choice or control is based on an inflated perception of the degree to which human beings are the authors of their own actions. So we all feel a deep sense of authority over our beliefs. When you ask yourself about your political values, you say, these are really mine, this is me. It's so much me that I wouldn't want to hang out with anyone who has different political values from mine. But your political values are just determined by what town you grew up in. The best predictor of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican is the urban, non-urban divide. And there are these demographic variables that have a huge impact on what our politics are. And from cases like that, I think what we should do when we find somebody, say, acting from their true self, is we should realize the true self is not internal, it's external. It's something we get from the social context. So when we see true selves, that is, when we see agents acting in a way we consider bad, the responsibility is shared. It's not just that agent, it's the environment that helps make that agent that way. So I think the real locus of blame is much broader than a single person. And as a result, the divide between broken brains, so-called broken brains, which are just brains that are on a different position with respect to the mean than ours may be, and the intact brain ceases to be that interesting. I think psychopaths don't know the difference between right and wrong. So by standard legal statutes, they should not be considered culpable for their actions, and they shouldn't be punished. They don't know the difference between good and evil. But I think our whole conception of punishment is way off. So instead, we should say, look, these are individuals who pose a certain kind of threat. Institutions of punishment should not be about retribution. They should be about threat reduction. And we should figure out how we can make these individuals less threatening to us. And if there's a way to do that that's non-retributive, that doesn't involve having them lose liberty or endure a lot of pain, then that should be the preferred method. So, I don't know if that's a long answer, but thank you. Thanks.
Well, I think that's actually a great way to segue into the discussion. I'm not ending the question session. I think we should thank Jesse, and then we'll reestablish a different kind of question session.
Thank you.